WSM. It's
Chronicles of Hope is essential reading for seekers of inspiration and spiritual empowerment. This series offers nourishment for those on a path of increased awareness at this challenging time. Inspired by higher sources of wisdom, Chronicles of Hope delivers messages to lift your spirit with a roadmap of hope and guidelines for living a life of expanded consciousness. The guides offer powerful insight for mental, emotional, and spiritual growth at this critical tipping point for humanity. The message is clear. We must change. We have the power to raise our vibrational energy individually and collectively before it's too late. I am Lois Herman, author of the best-selling Chronicles of Hope series and host of the Inspiring Hope radio show at WSMN.live or 95.3 FM. You can find me at loisherman.com or chroniclesofhope.net.
Welcome to Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman, a leading expert in professional coaching, clinical hypnosis, and energy clearing. Lois is an award-winning author of Chronicles of Hope. She has decades of experience in advanced hypnosis techniques, has conducted highly effective success coaching programs that have helped clients discover ways to achieve success, empower themselves, their families, as well as holistic practitioners to expand their practices. Get ready to be empowered with your host, Lois Herman.
Good morning and welcome to Inspiring Hope. I am your host, Lois Herman, and I'm here to inspire you with positive messages and celebrate amazing people who are making a difference in our world when we focus our thoughts and energies on truth, honesty, and integrity. We create powerful shifts that cause us to be more positive and peaceful. As we lift our energy, we empower everyone around us. If we each do what we can to make small shifts in awareness, we create ripples of hope. Join us as catalysts for positive change for our families, our communities, and our world at large. And I hope you're inspired by today's show. And happy Memorial Day. Let us celebrate all we are grateful for, thanking those who fought for our freedoms, our right to live, love, and prosper. May we be ever mindful of all the amazingly devoted people who gave their hearts to help others. Are we doing what we can to make a difference in our own way? What can we do to support our people now and for our future generations? As we pay attention to the truth being exposed, let's join together to support one another and the many good people who are dedicated to being of service. What can we each do to redesign our world to be more positive, healthy, and hopeful? With the threat of food shortages and concerns about toxic elements in commercially processed foods, how many of you are considering growing your own food? I know I am. We need to think about what must be done to sustain a healthy life for ourselves and our future. Being healthy depends on the actions we take now. In Chronicles of Hope, our guides tell us time and again that we must return to the ways of our native ancestors. They respected the land and worked in harmony with it to sustain life. They flourished in communities in a vast variety of regions, climates, and terrains around the world. That is, until they were invaded by takers, cultures more interested in taking rather than giving. We must be mindful to give with gratitude for the people and the beautiful land that gives us life. Mother Gaia gives us many insights in her sessions about being aware and respectful of all life in and on her. She speaks of returning to the customs of our ancestors who honored and lived in harmony with the earth and all creatures upon her. Taking a cue from her insights and a nudge to grow real food in addition to my lovely perennial gardens, I've started my own simple container veggie garden. Ever learning and growing, today I am really excited to speak with a very good friend who is an expert in the world of permaculture. In a moment, Dave McConville will share insights into the fascinating concept of redesigning our world with permaculture. He says it's so much more than gardening. It's everything the awakening have been talking about, from establishing community connections to sustainable living practices to sharing and caring for one another and our beloved earth. Even though we sense and feel there is much negative, sickness, and evil in the world, we have true hope for a beautiful, healthy, and happy future. As we join together to make a difference in our own way, we are determined to make it happen. Pause now and listen to the lyrics of this wonderful song called Light in My Window by Magic in the Other. Talk about a sense of inspiration. So thanks for that song, Dave. You guys all really should listen to it. The lyrics in it are fabulous. I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by my good friend and colleague, a former business associate, actually, and a permaculture expert, designer, and educator, Dave McConville. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Lois. Thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be here today.
I'm excited to have you. And you and I had a little conversation the other day about what permaculture really is. But what I'd like to know, how in the heck did you get into this?
That's a great question. Well, it's miles away from where I started out of college. I was a software engineer, and I was in the high-tech industry for about 14 years and found the work very intellectually challenging, but not very spiritually rewarding. And I didn't feel like I was putting my energies towards solving the problems that are facing us as a global situation. So I left high-tech. I actually became a massage therapist, which is where we met at the New Hampshire Health and Wellness Center. The intention was to transition into some other career, but first I wanted to learn how to take care of myself and take care of others. So while I was practicing massage, I had a visioning workshop at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, it was a beautiful spot and a very spiritual place. And I was taking a workshop called How to Make a Difference, Creating a Sustainable World, and I was introduced to the concept of permaculture.
Wow.
And so it was like a 3-hour session just giving the highlights of what it is, and it really resonated with me to my core. And that was back in 2007, and since then I've been studying, practicing, and now teaching permaculture.
So it kind of melds that analytical software engineer side with the design elements and then the taking care of self part and the spiritual part, the giving part. So it's, wow, that's fabulous.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was quite a journey, and once I connected to permaculture, like I said, it resonated with me to my core, and it gave me a set of tools and action to take, because I think that with all the challenges facing us as a global society, climate change, all of the ecosystem destruction and pollution, geopolitical instability, economic instability, things like that, it's easy to get overwhelmed and feel a little depressed, like you don't know where to begin. So permaculture gave me inspiration and hope and a set of tools that I could use to start making a difference. And I think anybody who's struggled with depression or things like that, taking action is the best way to break out of that cycle. So.
Yeah, and I know my initial impression of permaculture was, oh, grow a garden. And kind of that's what I'm doing, my own little pots, because I'm very familiar with gardening. I've got dozens of perennial beds, and I know how they speak to me about where they want to be and where they don't want to be, and I have to move them around. So I knew that I wanted to grow some veggies. Never really done that. Actually, take that back. I grew some tomato plants once, and I really doused them with Miracle-Gro. And I had 7-foot tall plants and hardly any tomatoes. So, you have to be aware of what you're doing. So this time And my husband is an avid, he grew up on a farm. But so here I am with my pots and I'm learning. But I decided I would love to ultimately have a raised bed. But I decided, well, no, let me see what I can grow. And I only want to grow things that I want to eat. Like, I don't want to grow zucchini because I don't like zucchini.
Yeah.
So I know it's easy to grow.
Rule number one, if you don't eat it, don't grow it.
Exactly. So I'm growing them in pots in my back, right outside of my back door where I can monitor them. And my biggest challenge right now is my husband's laughing at me saying, yeah, you're just creating bunny food. We have these cute little bunnies that come up. So I've learned how to use actually, my garden smells sort of like an Italian restaurant because it's garlic, onion, and cayenne pepper, and you spray around. And so far, so good.
So far, so good. Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
But permaculture is so much more than just growing a garden. Tell us more about it.
Yes. Well, it's not uncommon for people to associate permaculture with growing food because that's where its roots started. The word comes from the contraction of permanent agriculture.
I see.
So it was founded in the 70s by a couple of academics in Australia who were studying the global industrial food system and wondering if they could feed the world's growing population. Right? We don't really talk much about population explosion, but when I was a kid growing up, everybody was talking about it, and we've seen in the last 110 years the world's population has gone from 1.1 billion people to over 8 billion people. So that's a lot of people. Every one of those people need to eat, drink, breathe, clothe themselves, be housed, every day. So anyway, back to the origins of permaculture. So Bill Mollison and David Holmgren were studying the system, and they learned what we found out today, that the industrial food system is a destructive practice. It destroys our topsoil, it pollutes our water, it pollutes our air, and it's very dependent on fossil fuels. So they were seeking a permanent form of agriculture, so they looked at the wisdom of indigenous peoples around the world who, as you said, lived in harmony with nature for thousands of years before the advent of cheap energy in the form of fossil fuels, where we, changed everything. And so they took the indigenous wisdom and they recognized the close relationship that the indigenous peoples had with nature, so they turned to nature as the teacher. And so all of the principles of permaculture are based on observing and interacting with nature, the patterns and processes of nature, and trying to mimic those in our designs to make systems to meet our needs in a more sustainable way.
You've just given me goosebumps because that's one of the things that Mother Gaia says. People have stopped listening to her. And in order to sustain life, you've got to pay attention to her because she is the energy of Earth. And if Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
Right, and I think that's one of the issues here. We think that we are separate from nature, but we are not. We are nature. We evolved with nature.
Absolutely.
Over hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, the evolutionary process took place for us to be here. And with the advent of cheap energy, we have really tried to create this. We've really created this chasm between us and nature, and so we're very disconnected. We're not listening to her. We're not paying attention to her, and she's very sick, and part of it is, the reason is because of our impact on the planet.
Exactly, and we've only been on the planet a blip in her, in her long life.
Exactly.
And we have to recognize the damage that humanity has done in this short little pencil tip on the whole, the lifespan of Earth. So we need to turn our patterns, our habits around in order to sustain for our future generations.
Absolutely.
People are just living for today, and that is wrong. We have to live for today, plan for the future, take action today to create a sustainable future.
Right. The ethics of permaculture address that. The three ethics are care for the earth, care for the people, and care for the future. And the indigenous people knew that they were part of a continuum, and they honored and revered the 7 generations that came before them, and they considered the 7 generations that came after them in their decision-making process and in their planning. So we have, as you mentioned, lost sight of that and are very short-sighted, looking at the now, looking at the physical gain, looking at that physical world and trying to accumulate as much as we can.
So a sidebar question, is there a significance to 7? Are there cycles of 7 in nature? Is that why they look at 7 generations? I'm just curious.
That's a great question. I
Okay.
don't know. For as long as I've heard of this, I've heard of the 7 generations before and 7 generations.
I
I think it's
see.
just a long enough number that it's generations that you have not known in your life and that you will not know, because we know maybe 2 or 3 generations before
Right.
and 2 or 3 after. But
Because we asked her, when we were communicating with Mother Gaia in this session, we asked her about the 7 plagues. And what was that her? And she says, no, that was just nature. Those were, one led to the other, led to the other, led to the other. It was a natural cycle that happened. So when you said that, it triggered my curiosity.
interesting. Yeah, well, we're learning that everything is interconnected and interrelated,
Absolutely.
and nothing exists in and of itself. So any action or anything that is done is going to affect whatever is around us, and there'll be a ripple effect through that. So it's up to us to decide what kind of ripple we want to send out, a positive or destructive.
Exactly. Yes. And so there's ethics as the foundation. I liked that there's a foundation of ethics in permaculture, and then there were also principles.
There are principles, and as I mentioned, the principles are based on observing natural patterns, processes, and systems, and mimicking those. But I'd like to go back to the ethics for a minute, because
Sure.
I want to talk a little bit more in depth about each of those. So,
Yes.
care for the earth is the first ethic, and as we mentioned, the earth gives us everything that we need to provide all of our food, our water, our air, and I saw Deepak Chopra speak out in San Francisco back in 2007 at a Green Festival, and he said something that still sits with me today. And he said that we are the air recycled, we are the water recycled, we are the soil recycled. And so if we are what we breathe, what we drink, and what we eat, then right now we're pollution, because everything that we take in is polluted through our industrial processes. So in alignment with the earth care ethic, we need to regenerate our ecosystems. We need to clean this pollution out, and we can partner with biology, with plants or fungus through photo remediation or myco-remediation, that's using plants to filter the water, air, and soil and clean those up. So
Exactly. And I know in one of the sessions with the archangels, they said our current generation is a lot physically weaker than prior generations because of the toxins they've been exposed to. And so when you think about it, when you and I were children, there was, people had we had chicken pox and measles, but now look at all the diseases these kids have. ADD, asthma. There's so many different types of illnesses that weren't really around when we were kids. And our parents' generation, they were unheard of.
Right, and that's for a number of factors. Toxins in our environment is certainly one of them. Another factor is the food that we eat is less
Toxins in the
nutritious.
food,
It's
yes.
toxins, but also it's less nutritious because of the way that our industrial food system grows food, pumping in synthetic fertilizers. They're pumping in the macronutrients, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to make the plants grow large and look good, but they are not providing micronutrients, which we need. So rebuilding the soil, regenerating the soil, growing organic food, you're going to get all of those micronutrients and enzymes and things that we're missing in our industrial food diet. So,
Absolutely. And it used to say, we know don't eat, GMO. Look for GMO. Now it says if you look on things like potato chips, on salad bags of salad, bioengineered food. It actually says that right there, bioengineered, and I'm like, whoa, what is bioengineered food?
right. That's a great question. It's kind of a controversial issue. Nature has been cross-pollinating and mixing
Sure.
things, for a long time, and so man started to dabble in that. And we did cross-pollinating in labs to create certain species, and that's all wonderful. But then you get into the gene splicing and some people will argue that there are benefits to that, and there probably are benefits, but do we know all of the ramifications?
Exactly.
Like there are certain Monsanto, I believe, and the large seed companies, they don't want you to save your own seeds, so they want you to buy from them. So they're actually introducing crops that produce fruit that have seeds that are not fertile, so you can't germinate those seeds. So that's where growing heirloom varieties is wonderful. Then you can save your own seeds, be more reliant, produce varieties of crops that are specific to your microclimate where you
Yes.
are. So that's kind of a very important aspect of that.
I've long heard that. I mean, as a perennial gardener, there's certain flowers that I had when I lived down south that were beautiful, but they're not going to grow up here through the cold and the winter. So I've learned what grows here and how to tend those that grow here. And it's also the same. I also come to know that if you're living in New England, my brother-in-law has bees and he has honey down south in Tennessee, and it's wonderful honey. However, it's if I have honey from a local what are they, hivers? What are they called?
Yeah,
beehivers.
apiary.
No, that's a bird.
Apiary.
Okay.
Apiarist. I'm not sure what
Beekeepers.
Yes.
If I get local honey, it is going to help me with pollen, with allergies to the pollen in this area, because the bees are gathering pollen from the flowers, and then the honey that they produce is good for us. So I've long heard that we need to eat local to support our local farmers, but also because the foods that we eat in the different seasons are exactly what our body needs in this region right now for health.
Yes, absolutely. And, the great point about the local honey, because you're introducing all of these allergens from the pollens into your body, and your body is becoming acclimated to them, and that's going to reduce your allergy symptoms. So learning what grows and eating seasonally is important. Nature does provide what we need when we need it. In the spring, a lot of bitter greens are available, and bitter greens are very good for the liver and the cleansing process, which is the springtime is a great time to do that. So eating seasonally is very important. And permaculture recognizes that there's no cookie cutter solution. There's not one solution for everybody. So it recognizes that every climate is different, every region is different, the resources are different. So be it the food that you grow, the materials you use to build, all of these things are different. So permaculture gives you this toolkit of proven strategies, which, if you are in a situation that has been, as someone has come across before, they've applied the strategy and it worked, then you can use that, but it also provides you with a design process to figure out solutions to problems that have not yet been addressed elsewhere.
Yeah. Like, for instance, my husband, who grew up in Idaho, he says that we have a hard time growing spinach. Is it spinach here? Because it needs a long, gentle spring.
Right.
And New England goes from cold to boom, we're hot now. So there's not that long, the spring to grow things in. So it has a hard time. So these are the things, when you start to learn about this, you need to recognize in your region, there are certain things that grow well. And this is why we need to eat what grows well, because that's what our body needs.
Yes, and permaculture addresses that with the observe and interact principle, which we want to look at a system before we want to change anything. We want to understand it. We want to understand the problem. Oftentimes the solution to a problem is in the problem, so we really want to kind of understand that, but also to use slow and small solutions, and to accept feedback and apply self-regulation. So in this situation with the spinach, you observe that it's not growing really well here. Why? You start to learn the needs of the spinach, and you realize it's not the right climate for that. So you adjust that, you accept that feedback, and change your behavior.
So then you would tend to grow spinach in a greenhouse or something like that. If you
in a greenhouse, or indoors, or hydroponically, or perhaps in a cold frame, to either in the fall or the early spring, to try to create a microclimate that the spinach likes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I wanted to get back to the ethics real quick, if I could, because
absolutely.
I only got to the first one. So the second ethic is care for the people.
Yes.
And as I mentioned, the world's population has grown. We're at 8 billion plus people. Every one of those has physical social, emotional, and spiritual needs. And we live in a culture, Western industrial culture, that really only focuses on the physical
Yes.
needs. So we need to put systems into place that, we need to build community in order to build relationships, in order to break out of this isolation. I know we've been a little bit isolated because of COVID, but prior to that, we've been becoming more isolated. Even though we're more connected digitally across the globe, we are very isolated, and we don't interact with people when we're out on the roads in the cars. We view the other people in the cars as obstacles to get around. We don't see them as people. We don't have any sense of humanity or empathy for the other people, and we really need to pay
Get back to
attention to that. And so that's where social equity and social justice come into play too, making sure that all people are heard, they're at the table, their voices are heard, and issues are addressed.
And that was one of the problems with the masks, is you couldn't see somebody's face, and people were hiding their faces, and it's been really hard for the children. There's been a lot of issues with children with all the masking, not only the carbon dioxide that they're breathing, but then they don't see a smile, and the smile, that's the connection.
Right.
And we, so it's very important. And what I've noticed is that since the masks have come off, there are more and more people who are looking at each other and smiling. And you really appreciate that connection, that smile, that true heart-to-heart, eye-to-eye connection with somebody that was taken away from us for a period.
Absolutely, and that emotional development of children when seeing faces, making the connection to the eyes and to the facial gestures, the smiles, and things like that.
And then the fear of touch. Oh, don't touch that. Don't touch
Right.
that. The healthiest children are the ones that got their hands in the dirt and growing. I've got a little bit of poison rash going on me because I was digging in the dirt. But that is my therapy. That is my grounded. It feels good to get out there and get dirty, get into the dirt.
Yep.
And
aside from that, it is very beneficial for our immune system because
Yes.
we have on our skin bacteria that helps us to fight off infections. And when we live in these sterile environments using all these antiseptics and cleaning our environment, and so many kids don't go outside and play anymore, and we have an increase in allergies and immune disorders. And so getting out there and digging in the soil, you get that bacteria and stuff on your skin, and you're like, ooh, bacteria, I don't want that, but you do. It's healthy bacteria.
Absolutely.
And it helps to feed our
and then
immune
that takes
systems.
away the connection with Mother Gaia. If the child is inside playing video games all the time, then they're not out there playing and climbing trees. And it's important to get the kids back out there, touching, getting in, growing things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we as adults have to lead by example and
Absolutely.
put our phones down and make sure that we get outside and connect and bring the children with us and,
Yes.
and connect to the earth.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
what else about the ethics?
Let's see. So that is people care, and the final ethic is future care. It was originally called Fair Share, which was meant to instill the idea of not over-consuming.
Yes.
Consume only what you need, care for yourself, then care for others. And I always took that fair share also to mean that we have to accept our fair share of responsibility to fix the world.
Right.
So even though there's not one individual on this planet who has created all of these systems that have caused this damage, we all have a responsibility to take action to fix it.
Exactly.
So, we need to, first of all, raise awareness and let people know. I think a lot of people are aware of the problems, but they don't have any idea where to start. So give people a place to start.
And that's exactly right. One of the things that, again, I'm so excited because I just have the very first off-the-shelf copy of the Archangels book. And the Archangels were not featherweights, okay?
Right.
They came through and they said, by way of ignoring what's going on, you have caused the problem on your planet. You each must take ownership for what you can do. Everybody has an opportunity to do something. It doesn't have, you can't take on the whole world, but everybody can do their one little part. And that's what they're saying is eyes wide open, pay attention to what you have done, what you've ignored to allow the planet to get the way it is, and then step up and take your part.
So Bill Mollison, one of the co-founders of Permaculture, gives us the prime directive of permaculture, and that is that the only ethical decision is to take responsibility for the existence of ourselves and
Right.
that of our children.
Right.
And so we all need to make that decision to do that. And that doesn't mean that we all have to go out there and grow everything that we eat.
Right.
But we are all responsible for every item that we buy, the supply chain, how that the resources are sourced, how the product is made, whether it be child labor, slave labor, things like
Yes.
this. So every dollar that we spend, we can be supporting these systems that are not doing good for the planet. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to make smarter choices.
And it might be more expensive to buy local, to buy from a local farmer, a local somebody who's chickens or growing beef. It might be more expensive, but you're supporting our local community, and we know what kind of food we're getting.
Absolutely, and in the global industrial society, they operate under the model of extract a resource, produce a product, consume that product, and then discard it. And
Right.
so that's the very destructive process that we got into. And so in permaculture, we want to close those loops so that the output of one system becomes the input to another, because one of the principles of permaculture is produce no waste. If you go out into a forest, you don't see a landfill out in the middle of a forest or whatnot. Everything that lives and dies is then consumed and eaten by bacteria, fungus, arthropods, nematodes. All of these organisms in the soil. So whatever is output from one organism becomes input, either food or fuel for another. And so that's an example of trying to model our society after nature and closing those loops.
Exactly. And for instance, where I live, there's definitely there's my home and gardens, and then there's woodland around me. And I used to look into the woods before. Again, I'm constantly learning and growing, and think, oh, we need to get rid of those felled trees. And now I look at them and I see the birds nesting in them. I see that they're the habitat trees.
Right.
This is part of Mother Gaia. So this is part of the cycle.
It's part of the growth decay cycle.
Absolutely,
Exactly. Right. And so
yeah.
all the organisms that basically break all that material, the detritus, down into nutritional building blocks that get absorbed by new growth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's next? So ethics, and then
Yeah, so the principles are kind of, there are 12 official principles that were laid forth by David Holmgren in his book, Principles and Pathways to Sustainability. And I don't think we have the time to really unpack
we'll have you back.
each of one.
We'll have you back.
Okay, but
so the high points today.
yeah, so as I said, they're all based on observing nature, natural patterns, processes, and systems. And the first principle is to observe and interact. The second is to catch and store energy. So that's like looking at plants; they absorb the water and the sun and those kind of energies, and they grow from that. So we need to do that through renewable energy sources, through solar, through wind, through there's new ocean wave technology that uses the tidal currents to produce energy.
Rain barrels?
Rain barrels, exactly, catching that water. So, capture and store energy. And then, as I said, produce no waste. Accept feedback, apply self-regulation. All of these things are based on nature. And one principle that just popped to mind was to value diversity. And so in nature, there are no monocrops. You don't go out into a forest and see all of, one crop. There's a whole number of species all living together in an ecosystem. And we're finding out from observing nature that plants in a community are healthier and stronger than plants on their own. So if, again, in the industrial food system with monocropping, you have acres of corn or whatnot. If you have a pest or a disease that's introduced the plants are right next to each other, then they're going to wipe it right out because they're going to move on to the next plant and spread rapidly. If you're planting in a guild, which is what we call it in permaculture, you are camouflaging the plants with aromatic confusers, or you're attracting beneficial insects and pollinators. You can repel disease and pest with plants. They can put out hormones that will repel things like everybody has probably heard about planting marigolds with tomatoes.
Okay.
Because marigolds secrete a hormone that repels a nematode that attacks tomatoes.
Interesting.
So you can learn all of these little relationships, mutually beneficial symbiotic relationships, and plant in a guild.
So I have a question about that. Someone just told me that they stopped growing kale because of some little green worm that would always eat their kale.
Yeah, capsulipper.
So what should you plant with the kale?
Alyssum, sweet alyssum is a good thing to plant with
See, here comes
kale.
the flowers.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So
the
plant your
flowers
flowers and your herbs with your vegetables because
Interesting.
the herbs are going to put off an aroma that are going to confuse the pests. They're not going to be able to smell the plant that they're looking for. And the flowers, like in this case, the alyssum is going to attract a predatory wasp, which will lay its eggs in the caterpillars, and those eggs, as they grow, they will eat and destroy that caterpillar.
So
you
we shouldn't get rid of all those nasty wasps.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
They have a role, and there are different types of wasps.
Sure,
Like
yes.
there are plenty of bees,
Yeah.
but there are ways to introduce and attract predatory insects that are going to eat the ones that are eating
Interesting.
your
And
vegetables.
speaking of the guild, you talked about the Three Sisters.
Yes.
And I have a story about that, but tell them about the Three Sisters.
Sure. Yeah, the Three Sisters is a guild that was planted by the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and it consists of corn, beans, and squash. And the reason these work well together is they're mutually beneficial. The corn, first of all, that's the staple crop, calories, but it's a heavy feeder of nitrogen. So if you plant beans with the corn, beans are what is known as a nitrogen-fixing plant. So they take nitrogen from the atmosphere and they partner with some bacteria in the soil to store that nitrogen until the bean plant needs it. So that nitrogen is then available for the corn to grow.
Okay.
The corn provides the beans with a stalk, so they have something to climb on, and then the squash with its broad leaves create a great ground cover, which help to retain moisture and reduce weeds or volunteers.
So you don't have to mulch it.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
Yeah, it's not about, we have to have nothing around the corn, nothing around we got to put the artificial poles in the beans. So this was...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they found that they produced more food on an acre of land, growing them three together.
Interesting. And see, I had heard a story, and I think this was actually at the Manchester Millyard Museum, where there's right there near the Amoskeag Falls. And of course, my first book was The Spirits of Amoskeag, so I really was fascinated by the Amoskeag Indians. And that was a place where they used to gather for spring. In the spring, they would gather, and that was when the salmon ran. And so they would have these big fish fries, and they probably saved or somehow stored some of the salmon, but they would have these big, an event where they would burn the salmon in a circle in a fire. So then the bones from the salmon would be charred in the charcoal of the fire, and in that circle is where they would plant the Three Sisters. So they would plant the beans, the squash, and the corn, and then they would leave it for the summer and go off to hunt or whatever they would do during the summer, and then they would come back in the fall at harvest time, and they would have grown without man's need to nurture. But it started with this fire, between the fire of the wood and the minerals from the bones of the fish.
The bones of fish. Yeah, and that's a great example of how the indigenous people helped to accelerate this cycle of nature and bringing nutrients from the sea to the land and then growing onto the land. So as a permaculture designer, we're always looking for an opportunity to intervene to either accelerate or decelerate a natural process. So in the case of climate change, we want to decelerate that. So we want to find strategies that are going to absorb carbon, sequester it in the soil, and produce more oxygen, planting trees, things like that. Reducing our dependence on fossil fuel is number one, and then.
And I know in the Mother Gaia also said that there is plenty of food. We just need how to she can handle more people. Right. We just need to know how best to use her resources. And she said, mowing down the rainforest, that land was meant to grow rainforest. It was not meant to grow crops.
Right.
Or beef. And so we have to honor the different lands and what it was meant for. And that rainforest has a specific purpose to give us the oxygen, whatever it is that we need, that's beyond our simple, mow it down and grow, for cattle.
Right.
And she says, and once it's gone, you can reclaim it. But once you completely destroy it, look at Easter Island. Once you completely destroy it, it's gone.
Right.
You can't bring it back.
Yeah, and the rainforests are really the lungs of our planet, right? They
Yes.
absorb so much carbon dioxide and produce so much oxygen. And so that's a great example of a symbiotic relationship where we expel carbon dioxide and inhale oxygen, and trees do the reverse. So, there should, we need to make sure that we take care of the trees.
The trees and the algae in the oceans, another one.
Yes.
Huge. Yeah.
I had something I was going to say about something you spoke about.
About the Three Sisters and the...
Well, there was the Three Sisters. I was going to talk about biochar, which is another strategy that we use.
What is biochar?
Biochar is a strategy to literally char plant debris. So if you have your corn stalks at the end of a growing season or whatnot, you slightly burn them and char them, and by doing so, they will break down more slowly in the soil, and it becomes a way to sequester carbon. But the biochar also acts as a sponge and absorbs nutrients. So often in permaculture, people will create biochar, put it into their compost piles, and as things break down, rather than those nutrients leaching into the soil from rain or water or whatnot, those nutrients get trapped into the biochar, and then that gets into your soil when you spread your compost, and the plants can extract all those nutrients from that. But the main benefit of biochar is to sequester carbon.
So instead of burning all of your brush completely, you burn it to a degree, and then you mix it in with your compost.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And there's a whole process, and I'm not an expert on that, and but there are ways to in the process of making the biochar, you're capturing that heat to either heat water or heat a space or something. You're not solely burning a fire to create biochar. It's kind of a byproduct of another action.
Interrelated.
Right,
Wow.
and it's what we call stacking functions in permaculture. You do one thing and you achieve multiple goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're mindful, and that's the point, is learning and being mindful and being open to, I want to use the word experiment, but explore. Say explore.
Yes.
Learn, explore, and then correct.
Mm-hmm.
As you were saying, that there's
Accept
paying
feedback.
attention,
Yep.
accept feedback. And that's one of the things that I have learned in my perennial gardening. I used to dig things up and repot them immediately, and then they weren't happy and they'd die or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So now what I'll do is in the spring, I tag things that were obviously not happy where they were, or just overgrown, they need to be divided. And I will uproot them and put them in pots.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so basically they're potted perennials, and I move them around the garden until I find where they tell me where they're happy.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the fall, when their bloom season is done, then I will plant them. So that's what you're saying is what I'm doing is I'm paying attention. I'm accepting feedback from the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Not happy there, too hot,
Right.
too much sun, move it someplace else. Nope, not happy there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough water. So
Right, and in alliance with the observe and interact principle, when, like, say you buy a new piece of property and you're looking to develop that property, in permaculture we say you should observe that property for a full year before
Right.
you start to make changes, because you want to observe what happens throughout the 4 seasons, especially here in New England. We have that the hard freeze. We want to know where the sun lands, where the water flows, where the wind comes in, and learn all about that, what wildlife might be on the property and be passing through, and understand all of those energies, and decide whether we want to catch and store those energies or whether we need to mitigate them. Like in an urban environment, some of the energies that we might want to mitigate are, views of, like, in a backyard, you might want to, create some privacy screens and things like that. So, that view line is kind of an energy that you want to kind of mitigate or reduce noise or things like that. So.
exactly. And if you are in an urban type of environment, you could be growing in a courtyard, a rooftop. You don't necessarily have to have acres to grow things.
Exactly. And I live here in Nashua. I have 1/3 of an acre, and my backyard is what we call a food forest, which is a perennial polyculture. So we designed a system with all sorts of perennial plants that produce food, habitat, fodder for the wildlife. And so I basically identified where I needed to walk in my backyard and created my paths, and everything else became a garden bed. And then I started to lay out the plants in those beds. So I have, I lost a couple of fruit trees, so I think I'm down to 8 fruit trees, but I have some blueberry bushes, some raspberry bushes, grapes, elderberries, asparagus, horseradish, strawberries, all sorts of these perennial crops that, you set up once and then they'll feed you for years and you just have to maintain them. So there are
It's
also
like my
strategies.
perennial flowers.
Exactly, but you can introduce some food components to that, some elements.
In my perennial garden beds?
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
I'm going to have you out to my house and you can.
Right on.
Need
Yeah,
to-
check it out and assess it. And
Yeah,
give you some
that's
recommendations.
exciting. That's
Yeah.
exciting. So I don't actually have to have like a raised bed for my vegetables. I can actually plant vegetables in among my perennials. And what you're saying is they may actually be beneficial cohabitators.
Absolutely, yeah. And there are some plants that don't like each other, but you can. It's very easy
It's
to
kind of like people.
yeah, exactly. So you try to find the ones that benefit each other and put them next to each other.
So have you written a book?
I have not written a book. No,
Yet?
No. I had the thought of a book several years ago, but it didn't transpire. But I'm considering
Yet. Yeah.
a book. Yes.
So is there a book that people or a website? What is your website?
Sure. My website is dmcpermaculture.com. And right now it's having some technical issues, but I'm hoping to have that resolved soon.
Okay.
But there are some great resources out there. I think for listeners, if you want to get a sense for what permaculture is, then I would recommend Gaia's Garden by
Okay.
Toby Hemingway.
Okay.
And that's what I wanted to mention earlier. Toby Hemingway, when you were talking about Gaia, talking about the abundance on Earth. So Toby Hemingway says that permaculture gives us a toolkit to move from a society based on fear and scarcity to one based on love and abundance.
That's amazing.
And it is, and there is enough to go around
Yes.
if we all don't overconsume, and we consider others and consider that we are all interconnected and interrelated, and all of our actions impact everything around us.
And that was one of the other things that you had mentioned, is that it definitely is about growing, but it's also about sharing. It's the community that, and this is what I have decided. I'm growing some cruciferous.
Cruciferous,
Yeah,
yeah.
the cabbage and broccoli and
Cauliflower,
cauliflower.
kales, all those.
Yeah, and kale. So I'm going to try my hand at those. Although I'm going to have like several dozen of all this, and at the end of the season, there's no way I'm going to be consuming all of that. I'm going to have to learn how to put some of this stuff up. But I've got other friends who are growing beans and growing things. So we've already talked about, well, I'll trade you this if you trade me that. So that's what you're talking about is developing a community that is supporting one another.
Right, exactly. Because no man is an island. No
Yes.
person. I don't want to. No person is an island, and so we need the help of others. And none of us got to where we are today on our own. We have gotten here on the backs of many over generations of progress. Some of it may not be considered progress now. We're learning that it's kind of destructive, but everybody who came before us made it possible for us to be here and live our lives, and we need to consider those who are coming after us. And so permaculture, as I said at the beginning, to kind of come full circle, that it started out of developing a permanent form of agriculture, but it has kind of morphed into a larger thing, and permaculture now stands for permanent culture. So we want to create a permanent culture that can survive here on this planet. And in some conversations I've had with people, they don't like the word permanent because it implies fixed, and we need to be adaptive, we need to evolve. Sure. So it's kind of a paradox, the name, but we need an everlasting culture here. But our first step is to regenerate the ecosystems that are here before we sustain it, because we don't want to sustain where the world is right now. It's kind of a bit of a mess.
It sure
and there's
is.
lots of things that we can try to straighten out and regenerate, clean the environment, bring some social equity and justice to our society. We have the Western civilization, industrial civilization, is seeking to create like a global village where the the power is concentrated at the top, and we're seeing it now where resources are extracted from one continent, they're shipped to another to manufacture product, shipped to yet another continent to be sold, and then the waste is brought to another.
Right.
So we need to
it's messed up.
we need to reskill and we need to relocalize our communities and make a global network of villages where each village has some sense of self-reliance.
So you're even talking about different skills. So you'll back, in older, if you think about the people who first settled here in New England, you had a village smithy that was doing the shoeing and the making the hardware, the ironwork, and then so you had different skill sets, and then a lot of over time those skills have not been venerated. But the college education has been venerated, and instead what we've got to get back to venerating the different skills, because that's what's going to sustain us, is having everybody have skill sets that are community-based, tradable, exchangeable, supportable.
Right, and that's kind of, I think, where we started, but then everything got commodified and was focused on profit with no accountability. So getting back to relocalization, like you mentioned, the Smiths, as well as people who can make clothes, preserve food, save seeds.
Yeah, beekeepers.
Exactly. And raising livestock. On a small scale, livestock can be regenerative to the soil. The way that we manage our livestock right now is we have too many animals in too small of a space.
Right.
They need to get back to their grazing.
And they're not happy.
They are not happy.
And so then that energy, we feed on that energy.
And that toxins.
I get my eggs from a woman that she raises her ladies, and they're happy chickens. And I can feel the difference, Might not necessarily taste the difference, but the eggs are so colorful and so beautiful, and I just enjoy them.
You certainly can see the difference in a farm fresh egg. The yolk is so brilliant orange as opposed to a pale yellow from an industrial egg. Yeah, because they have a diversity of food sources. They're getting more of those micronutrients, more of the things as opposed to a corn diet. And they eat the ticks. Get your guinea hens out there to eat the ticks. And
That's right.
Yes, exactly.
It is interesting how we getting back to where our ancestors used to be is what it's really, really, really critical. All the old herbs that our ancestors knew how to work with,
healing,
that got passed over for modern medicine that's all about big pharma. No, we got to get back.
Right, exactly. And a lot of the pharmaceuticals are based on natural products. So getting back to the natural healers, the herbalists and things like that, and growing our medicine in our gardens as well. So I mean that's some of the things that I grow. I have echinacea. Oregano is a great calendula. Elderberry is wonderful medicinal. So there's all sorts of things that we can grow.
Even the dandelions. So I have a little poison ivy going on me here, or poison something that I got. My garden kissed me, and someone has suggested you need to dandelions. So I've been drinking dandelion tea. I've pulled up the few dandelions that I can find that my husband hasn't mowed down, and I need to make a poultice and use the dandelions, and definitely helping. So
dandelion, and I can't remember the name of the Latin name for it, but it translates to the official cure-all is dandelion does. Officialis, I can't recall it. So I mean, there's so much of this knowledge that we've lost, and we need to.
It's there.
To get
we
back.
have to find it again.
Yes, and
it's in our DNA. It's in our energy. We have that memory. We have to tap into it, and that's the beautiful thing about getting quiet with nature. Things come to us, and then we're like, wow, where did that? That's an intuitive knowing that we have.
Right. It's innate in our in our bodies through the generations that came before us who used to live in harmony with nature.
So any last thoughts in this last minute we have?
Well, first I want to thank you for having me here today.
Thank you,
really
Dave.
Great to be here. And I also want to give gratitude to all of my permaculture teachers. And as I said, nobody gets to where they are on their own. There are many that, we stand on the backs of. And to all my permaculture teachers.
Especially Mother Gaia.
Yes.
And
Mother
all her
Gaia,
plants.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So, start small. Start being aware of where your food comes from. Start with your food shed. Go to farmers markets. Go join a CSA, community supported agriculture, to support local farmers, and just be aware of the impact that we're having.
Wonderful.
And look for ways for change.
We'll have to have you back on. Thank you,
I'd love to.
Dave.
Thank you,
you,
Lois.
listeners. Until next time, take a moment to look up, stay positive, and be the light in someone's day.